I'm here with Father Bart Tollenson. He's a priest of the Diocese of Helena, Montana, a good friend of Father Stu Long, and I just asked him to tell us a little bit about Father Stu. You knew him personally, you ordained with him?
And, we were ordained, December 14th, 2007. We were ordained together at the cathedral in Helena.
And he grew up here in Helena?
He did. He was born in Seattle. He grew up in Helena, and he did grow up in a religious home. He had an older brother and sister, and then he was born, and then his brother Stephen was about 4 years younger, and then 4 years later, another sister, Amy.
Okay. And he lost his younger brother, right, at 5 or 6?
Yeah. So when Stu was 10 and Stephen was 6, Stephen contracted some sort of form of meningitis and went to sleep and never woke up. And they took him to the hospital and he died there. And Stu was like, "Where's my brother?" And Stu's parents didn't really know how to communicate other than just kind of pointing up to the sky and saying,
right.
He's gone, he's not coming back.
Right. And that was a deep pain for him his whole life?
It was. Despite his own sufferings, he would always say, "I don't know why God took Stephen." Mm-hmm. It was always kind of this question about why did God take Stephen? And of course, he has the answer to that now. Mm-hmm. They're probably together now, but right. It was something he pondered throughout his life.
Right. And his youth here in Helena was full of fun and zeal.
Well, yeah. So I know that he and his buddies did all kinds of hijinks and antics. He said, my first exposure to organized religion was on the way to school. The cathedral was a shortcut to get to his elementary school. And so he and his buddies would run through the cathedral every day. And there was a priest in there that he'd start screaming at him, "You kids, get out of here. Don't come through here." Stu thought that was really funny. So,
and his father was away with work a lot, right? Out of the home.
Yeah, my understanding was particularly after Stephen died, Bill especially was operating heavy equipment, and he had connections down in Los Angeles. So he oftentimes would be gone for a couple months, go down to LA and work, and then come back home for a week or two sometimes, and then go back on another job. So he was in and out of the house a lot when Stu was growing up.
Right. And Stu was a large, big guy, athletic, and had some success.
Yeah, he played football. He was 6'2", and it was a lineman in football. He wrestled in high school, played football in college, and Stu always said that whenever I played on a football team, we'd always lose, and then when I would move on, they'd start winning. So he says, "You want to have a winning football team, put me on your team for a couple of years, and then I can move on." But it was in college, at Carroll College in Helena, that Stu learned to box. It was a priest, actually, that invited him down to the gym. He was late for this priest class one day and called Stu up after class and said, "Why were you late?" And Stu gave some lame excuse, and the priest said, "Well, your punishment is to meet me in the gym this afternoon." And so there, and he says, "I'm going to teach you how to box." And so the priest himself was a great amateur boxer and taught Stu how to box and realized he had some real skills at it, and got him another coach, and he boxed in Montana.
And he boxed after college, right?
He did. His plan was, you graduate from college, you get a degree in English, and his life plan was to become a professional boxer. So he had a few bouts. Stu had injured his tooth and his jaw a little bit when he was on a bicycle once. He fell off a bicycle and knocked a tooth out, and they tried to put it back in, and it just created all kinds of infection. So he was a little weak there, and Stu in the ring took a blow right to that place, a heavy punch, he said, and just he could feel the pain. He said, "My jaw just kind of cracked and broke, and just the searing pain." And so after that, he had fevers and infections, and it was just like, you really shouldn't be boxing. This area in your face is really weak. Right. And Stu tried it once again and realized he was too afraid of getting hit there. He couldn't box the way he wanted to, so he gave it up.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised to learn about his love of literature and things. He was a big reader, and
He was a reader. I mean, if Stu read something he liked, he'd keep reading it, and he'd really read it. And if he started reading something he didn't really care for, he'd just kind of toss it aside.
yeah.
You wouldn't expect it when you met him, how much knowledge he had. He was very bright.
Right. And his father's sisters were telling me the dad is a big reader as well.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because you meet Bill Long and you think the same thing, and then you start to talk to him and you realize this guy's very well read. He has a lot of knowledge about a lot of things. Very, very bright. They both have very high IQs.
Right. And that kind of comes up later too. I think his love of philosophy and things. But so what happens? His boxing career is over. He's doing some bouncing work.
Yeah. So his work, my understanding was he was a bouncer because he was really, really good bouncer. He was also a good street fighter, and so he was just kind of moping around the house and doing bouncing work. And my understanding was he was kind of driving, particularly his mom, Kathleen, crazy. And so she had an idea one day. She was like, "Stu, you like movies?" And Stu was like, "I love movies." And she was like, "Well, you're not doing anything here. Why don't you move to LA and get into the movies? Give it a try." And Stu really liked that idea and thought this was his calling. So he packed up a car pretty quickly and went down to LA, found a place to live, and tried to break into the movies. And I'm not sure, in a certain way, it was Kathleen's way of trying to get him out of the house, just give him something to get him out of the house and stop moping around after his boxing career was over.
And somebody was telling me too that he would joke with his father. They would back and forth. They would quote movie lines to each other.
It was kind of a thing in the whole Long household. They would focus on movies they liked, and they would have movie lines, and just that they would say a line, and everyone would know kind of what you were getting at. I quoted Rocky a lot, I think. So
there's a lot of deep truth in Rocky. So he goes to Hollywood, and I heard he sold shoes. Is this one of his first jobs?
I don't know that he sold shoes or not. He would do odd jobs. He worked as an extra in movies and got paid to do that, but he didn't like that because, you just are in the background the whole time. He tried out for a lot of parts, and he was cast in one role. It was a movie of the week for CBS, and he was the bad guy and a murderer. And Stu said it was so awful that he never wanted anyone to ever watch it. And we're still trying to see if we can track it down. Because I was like, I know he said he had a copy, and I asked him if I could see it. And he goes, never. No one's ever going to see that. So, but it was also, if we say in Hollywood, the casting couch that got Stu turned in another direction. He did not like that, and it really bothered him. And he was like, I don't want to have to deal with that. And that was kind of the thing, a few propositions, and he was like, I'm done. I'm done with this.
Somebody was telling me at some point he sold shoes, didn't have a car, and early on he was running to work, but the problem was it was along a freeway.
It probably is true. I haven't heard that. I know that he got gigs bouncing. He bounced at a comedy club and a bar when he was trying to do acting, and so he was really good at that, and he could get work doing that.
Right. And eventually he worked at a museum, right?
Right. So it's an art museum, I think the Norton Simon Museum, and he kind of, I think, got his way in initially as kind of a security person there, and then he just worked his way up, and by the time he left, I think he was supervising over 60 people, and he really liked that work, and he was good at it, and they liked him.
Yeah. I got online and looked up the museum, and it had serious artwork in it. It was a serious thing. And somebody, I saw a reflection, somebody was saying they worked there at the time with him, and they would talk philosophy for hours. He said he loved philosophy, and they named some philosophers they talked about. But one night he's going home from the art museum, and what happens?
Right, so it was at night. He was coming home from work, and Stu had a motorcycle, and he loved motorcycles. And, I can just imagine Stu wasn't the probably safest motorcycle driver, being bold and just coming home on the LA freeway. And the way he described it to me was a car pulled out kind of in front of him through a lane and just knocked him off his bike really hard. And he and the bike flew into the air. And then he said he was just coming down another car. Before he even hit the pavement, another car hit him. and pushed him across the highway, and then a car ran over him. A third car ran over him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did he like break a lot of bones? I mean, like legs and stuff, or?
I don't know. I need to check on that because I don't know. The thing that was amazing is I think he was out of the hospital like 9 days later. And he needed a lot of rehabilitation. So if there were bones that he broke in his legs, he got healed pretty quickly, and he was doing rehab for a couple of months to get back.
Mm-hmm. And he had something of a mystical experience, right, after that?
Yeah. So, during the motorcycle accident, he said, I mean, sometimes he would say, I never had an out-of-body experience, but then he would describe an out-of-body experience, just like for a moment, thinking he could see himself on the freeway, his lifeless body on the freeway, and the ambulance. And then he says, I remember waking up in the ambulance a couple of times and there being a lot of blood and feeling like life was kind of coming out of me. And he said after the whole thing, he just thought, I've been spared. I should be dead, and I've been spared. And I don't know why, but I knew someone intervened and kept me alive, something beyond, just medicine. In fact, when they got to the hospital, they thought Stu was going to die. And they put him in a room. Bill was working in LA at the time, so he came over to the hospital and was trying to find Stu and went through the ER and was looking in rooms and said, I finally found Stu, and he was in there by himself, and I thought he was dead. And I went up and checked his pulse, and I could feel a pulse. And no one was doing anything to help him. And then pretty quickly his girlfriend came in and started talking to him. And Stu came to when his girlfriend started talking to him. And the nurse comes in and says, well, I guess you're not going to die after all. Maybe we ought to do something. I was like, wow. So.
And some of his girlfriends did have a good impact on him, right? Practicing the faith.
Well, there was the one girlfriend that he was really serious with, and I know they talked marriage a lot, and they were even preparing for marriage. But after his accident, he was rehabilitating, and she was helping him. And Stu said she comes in one day and starts to vacuum, and it's like he's looking at her thinking, there's this strange glow about you. Why are you glowing? And she said, well, I decided today, for the first time in about 13 years, to go back to confession. So because of Stu's accident, she went back to the church, made a confession, and she had decided and told Stu, if you want to marry me, you have to be Catholic. So Stu said, well, okay. Now, it's funny because he'd gone to a Catholic college and didn't think much of religion, but because of that accident, he had a new opening to something in his heart. So he agreed and started RCIA.
Oh, wow. And did he get active in the parish and things? Was accepted at the parish? Or was it a close community in the parish, you think? Or?
Yes, well, my understanding, he got really active, really took to the faith, made some good friends, started volunteering, did a lot of pro-life work, particularly after he was Catholic. He got really involved, always was a big believer in pro-life.
Wow. And then his kind of journey progressed, and thinking about the priesthood. How did that come about?
Right. So when he was baptized, he said, I had this strange notion as I came out of the waters that God was calling me to be a priest. He said, I didn't hear a voice or anything like that. But
and did he do like a full immersion? Or?
I think there was an immersion. Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I don't know exactly. I don't think it was exactly the way the film depicted it. But there was something like that. And he went and talked to the priest after the baptism a few days later, and the priest was like, well, every young man has this idea they want to be a priest when they, become Catholic, and don't worry, it'll go away after a few months, especially in your case, And it didn't for Stu. It just kept kind of coming back, and he tried to push it away, and then he'd come back. He pushed it away and come back, and after he broke up with his girlfriend, he dated a few other women, and would even talk to them about becoming a priest, and they were like, why are you talking to us about becoming a priest? One woman, I understand, got really mad at him and said, you shouldn't be going out on dates with girls if you want to be a priest. And he like kind of took that seriously. So at that point, he quit his job at the museum, started working at a Catholic school, getting a lot less money. He was coaching, did football at first, and then went to coaching wrestling, and he was teaching religion. And he lived with another guy that was a Catholic guy and had good Catholic friends. They hung out together, but he wasn't really making any steps to become a priest. And then one day, he said he was making a sandwich, And the guys that he hung out with kind of grabbed him and said, "You got to come with us." And they threw him in the car. And he said, "I didn't get to eat my sandwich." He still kind of bemoaned that he didn't get to eat his sandwich. But they took him to a charismatic conference of sorts or something. And the keynote speaker was Father Benedict Rochelle. And he said, "Man, when I heard Father Benedict, he just hit me right between the eyes." And he goes, "That's the kind of priest I want to be like." And so Stu decided he must be called to be a Franciscan. And so he made the decision, kind of gave away his stuff, abandoned some of it. Bill said he had to go back into where Stu was living in LA and kind of take the rest of the stuff Stu had left. He drove his car to Ohio, I think, sold his car, got on a bus, and went to New York and tried out with the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal. They sent him to Steubenville for a master's in theology, and for a couple of years, and he really liked being in Steubenville. And then, at the end of that, the friars just said, "You're a great guy, but you're just not cut out to be a Franciscan with us." And Stu was kind of upset by that. He didn't like to be told, that. And they said, "But we do think you might have a vocation to the priesthood. So head back to Helena, talk to the bishop there, and see if he'll take you as a diocesan seminarian." And so Stu took the advice, and the bishop accepted him and sent him to Mount Angel to study for the Diocese of Helena.
And so Mount Angel's in Oregon, right?
Yes.
And, run by Benedictines.
Right.
And what was his experience there?
Well, in terms of, the formation experience, I know that, most guys really liked Stu. Few didn't, but most guys really liked him. He challenged them in formation. There were some teachers and priests there that Stu really liked a lot, and there were some that Stu didn't care for. And he would make his feelings known to everybody, particularly in class. And so sometimes his evaluations weren't the best, because he was kind of, he was like, call out people right between the eyes. And they were like, he doesn't have any flexibility or humility to receive another version other than his own. But Stu was faithful, and he stuck with it. And, everyone knew that. And even some formators, even here in Helena and at the seminary, I said, "This guy is faithful. We got to take it seriously." Stu also had a hip problem, and I think it was maybe in his second year of theology that he had hip replacement surgery. They found a tumor, a fist-sized tumor, underneath his hip. And after that surgery, Stu recovered, but he said he started to notice body weakness. And he said he tried to hide it because, I didn't want anyone to know he was weak. He said, one day I was in my room at the seminary trying to put my shirt on, and it was like all the energy in my body just drained out onto the floor, and I couldn't even move my arms. Didn't know what was going on. And he kind of slowed down a little bit, but didn't think much of it. And then I remember after third theology, he was like, "I got to get some doctors to look at me more because something's not right." And it was in fourth theology, they definitively diagnosed him with a body myositis.
So he was already a deacon at that?
No, well, it was interesting because he was ordained a deacon in December 2006. And everyone noticed that, like, he was slowing down, and he was saying, "Some days I'm so exhausted, I can't even do anything." We were supposed to go to dinner the night after his transitional diaconate ordination. And he contacted me and said, "I don't have the energy to go to dinner." And I was like, "That's wild, because you love going to dinner." And we were going to go to a movie. And he goes, "Let's just put it off for a few days." So we got together a few days later, and I remember the vocation director just said, "Something's not right with Stu." And then in January, he got one diagnosis, and then definitively, I think I found out in February that he had this disease, and what did this mean?
Right. Was that back in Oregon?
He was, yeah. So I think he went to doctors at Oregon State, and then also down to Los Angeles to a specialist there.
And then he was real upset by that and struggled with that? Or?
Well, it was almost like Stu didn't want to believe it. It's like, "Oh, this can't be right. I'm going to be a priest, and, I don't know what that means. I'm a tough guy. I can fight through this." And they gave him a lot of hope. They said, "We don't have a cure for the disease, but we can slow this progression down. They're making breakthroughs all the time." And Stu was like, "If I can stay alive long enough, maybe they can find a way to reverse this." It's an autoimmune disorder. And Stu, it never crossed his mind, at least in our conversations, that this would hold up his ordination. Like this would be a problem. Because there had been saints that had physical handicaps, and they were amazing. So why should Stu be singled out? And so when the final evaluation from the seminary came and just said, we're concerned with your health, and because of that, we don't know that we can necessarily recommend you for priestly ordination, he was shocked and devastated.
And but that wasn't the end of the story, right? That ultimately the diocese has the final say.
Right, the bishop has the final say, and Bishop Thomas made it known that he'd received the evaluation from the seminary and told Stu, though, but I'm going to pray on this and think about it. And it was from there, during that time, Stu was sent. He had been a seminarian in a summer assignment on the Native American reservation, the Blackfeet, in Browning, Montana. And as a deacon, Stu was sent back there just so he could go back to Browning and serve there, and we'll see what happens. So at the same time, I had made a change from the Diocese of Dallas to the Diocese of Helena because I had family that had moved to Montana and I wanted to be up here closer to them. And so the Bishop Thomas said, we're going to also, Bart, have you just wait just a little while since you're kind of new to the diocese and everything. And I said, that's fine, So we both would have normally been ordained in the summer of 2007, but we were both kind of waiting. So in the early fall of 2007, Stu went on a pilgrimage to Lourdes, France. And he thought he was going to be healed. I mean, before he left, he told me, he goes, I'm going to go to Lourdes and get healed. I was like, wow, that's pretty strong faith there, Stu. And so when he went into the waters of Lourdes, he thought I'd get up and walk out. I mean, he just said, Our Lady's going to heal me. And he went into the waters, got up, and fell back over into the water. Someone caught him, and they had to get a couple of guys to get him back up. And in that moment, I mean, I think that of all the despair, that was the despair, because he's like, I've given up everything to follow this path to serve God. I've gone through the entirety of seminary, learned everything I needed to learn academically and intellectually about being a priest. I've given up my heart, and I'm with this disease. God's going to take away my life, and now I'm not going to be a priest. And he just hit rock bottom. There's just an abandonment, a devastation, hopelessness that entered his soul. And one of his buddies that was on the pilgrimage, who was a priest, said, Stu, a lot of people went to a lot of effort to bring you over here to France. Give Our Lady another chance. Go back into the waters. And Stu didn't want to at first, but he finally agreed to it. And so Stu said, when I came out of the waters of Lourdes the second time, there was an interior miracle. All of a sudden, all my anger, my despair, my despondency became peace. I was overwhelmed with peace and God's love for me and God's plan for me. And I just knew it would be all right. And after that, they went on, as the pilgrimage finished, they went to Paris and to Notre Dame Cathedral. And Stu said in Notre Dame, we were going around looking at statues, praying. Someone was with me. I was giving them some history of these saints, and got to the statue of St. Joan of Arc, and I looked at it. I didn't know who it was. I knew who St. Joan of Arc was. I didn't know who that was St. Joan. And he just said, who is that young boy? And some French woman overheard him and came up to him and said, that's Joan of Arc. And Stu was like, oh. So he said he was
the patroness of France.
Yeah, the patroness. Yeah, I think, So anyway, Stu was there, and he said, pretty quickly after that, he had this moment where he said, all the pain in my body went away. For a moment, is like I had no pain in my body. And I realized I wasn't really in my body. And I also realized that St. Joan of Arc was present. And there she kind of offered me an invitation. She said, I carried the flag for Christ and for France, and I suffered martyrdom. And God wants to invite you to carry the cross of Christ in your disease, and to be a martyr for God in your disease. Would you say yes? And Stu offered himself in that moment, kind of in a mystic sort of way. He said, when I kind of came to, I was crying and the pain came back into my body. And so he didn't really know how to process that. Stu wasn't just a born mystic. It was just kind of, he processed it himself going through that.
And there was a moment where he said yes. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, interiorly, he said yes.
Okay.
And he said, from that moment on, I knew I would not be healed of the disease. I would do anything that I could to extend my life, to take medicines, treatment. I would go to great lengths to do that. But I knew just fundamentally that I wasn't going to be healed of that disease.
And did he have constant muscle pain, you think?
Well, I mean, it was the pain of like, your muscles don't move the way they used to move, and you want your fingers to move, and they're not moving, and you can feel them, but you can't move them. You have an itch, you can't scratch it. You can't, you got to steady yourself to get up.
Wow.
So, but when he got back from France, he went and saw Bishop Thomas, and Bishop says, I prayed to Our Lady, and I've decided you need to be ordained to the priesthood. I'm going to ordain you and Bart together. So.
Wow. What was that day like?
It was one of those things for both of us. It was a long time coming, because you work so hard to be a priest. You go through so much schooling, so many years in seminary formation. And so the fact it was really happening was kind of surreal. It was funny because Stu and I had come from such backgrounds. We weren't traditional backgrounds for priestly candidates, so we kind of had that in common, both converts. And we still had doubts. There were some doubts that we shared together. We weren't going to share them publicly, but just doubts about, are we going to be able to do this? And Stu was always like, yes, we're going to be able to do this. And we're going to do it together, and you're going to be a good priest, and we're going to be priests together. And so I mean, we even talked about it on our ordination day. And I remember standing at the back of the cathedral right before we went down, and I looked at Stu and I said, this is it. And he gave me that. He sometimes he just gave me this look where I knew what he meant, and it was like, this is it. We're going to go, and we're going to offer ourselves for Christ, and we're going to, be on the cross with him, and we're going to rise with him, and we're going to serve him, and let's do it. And here we go.
Yeah, I know that's been my experience too, at moments of we weren't sure, doubt, or whatever, and God put people in my life that had plenty of self-assurance and things to do.
Yeah. It's funny how that works. But I know that Stu we both spoke at the end of the ordination. Bishop had just told us before, he goes, you both are going to talk, you figure it out. And Stu just looked at me and said, you go first. And that was all. That was the end of the conversation. So, but that was great because Stu got up and he just said to the congregation, he goes, I'm a miracle right in front of you. And barring a miracle of Christ, I'm going to die with this disease. You can see it in my body already. I'm on crutches, but I'm doing this for the love of God. Yeah. And God's called me to it, and God is real. And you all need to know that God's work in our lives are real. People that didn't even know Stu that had come for me were just like, I was just crying. It was just an amazing message. And from that point on, Stu knew he was on limited time, and he served with great zeal every moment of his priesthood. He had some dark days, but for the most part, he was right at it.
Yeah. And I guess he had a lot of gratitude towards the bishop.
Yes. Yeah. Bishop Thomas was tremendous to Stu. I mean, really to both of us, he was just great. And his faith, really came out, and his prayer life, praying through this for both of us, and for Stu especially. Mm-hmm.
And so he was a priest for 8 years, is that right?
Well, he's a priest forever, right, Father?
Right.
So, no, but here on this earth, so 2007 to 2014, 6.5 years. 6.5.
And the last 4 was in a nursing facility?
Right, at Big Sky Nursing Facility. So he did, first assignment was back on the reservation as a priest and at the Little Flower Parish, and then on to Holy Family in Anaconda for almost 2 years. And then from there, he was just getting so weak and had to be in a wheelchair full-time onto Big Sky Care Center because they wanted to get him back closer to his parents and his family. And also they had a lift in Big Sky that could actually pick Stu up so he could shower, he could go to the bathroom, they could do what they needed to do.
I don't know if you can tell us or hint at some of the struggles he did have in the priesthood and how he persevered through that. Was it just the limitation, the physical limitation? Yeah,
for the most part. It was just his weakening body. And there were multiple times. He did it with other people too, but he'd say, Bart, you got to come over. We got to talk. And I'm like, okay. And so I come over, and if there was a line or whatever, he'd just tell people he's done for today, you know. I mean, because it was
Yeah.
like, Stu was just kind of, it was interesting. He said, close the door, you know, and sit down. And it was just like, you know, I can't celebrate Mass anymore. I can't do this. I'm getting weak. I'm going to die. And it's hard to breathe. And I can't eat. And, you know, this is driving me crazy. And, you know, and I just had this sense. It was like God just telling me, as he's encouraged you, you keep pushing him.
Right.
And I was just like, Stu, you can't give up. Let's figure, what's the problem? Let's figure out a solution. I said, God is working through you, and you're getting humble enough to realize it.
Yeah.
But he's working through you, and you got to keep going. And always at the end of that time, Stu would agree that, you know, he wouldn't give up. And he had that conversation a few times with some other friends, but I really pushed him. I did. And once I really pushed him really hard. I mean, he was like done. And I just said, I got mad at him. And I kind of almost bullied him a little bit. But Stu took it. I mean, you know, he heard it, and he kept at it. And boy, am I glad I did that, because, I mean, I hated that because the guy was suffering, but he was just like, his ministry, those last couple of years, man, he was incredible. It was amazing to see what God could do with him.
And there was a point that he could not offer Mass anymore? Is it?
No, I mean, well, so eventually he couldn't do it on his own. I mean, and I could talk about that, but then eventually we recruited people to help him. And I talked Stu through it. He didn't like the idea at first. And I said, look, Aaron and Hur in the Old Testament had to hold up Moses' arms so they could win the battle. Why are you so proud that you won't do that? And Stu took that, and he goes, okay. And I said, here's the guys we're going to teach. I taught 3 guys how to help him, and then he eventually got more guys taught, and there was a whole crew that could help him do Mass. In the end, they would move his hands. They would, you know, do the things he needed to do. They would help him elevate things. They would even give him a little bit of communion so he could, you know, complete the sacrifice. And then he would instruct them on exactly how to purify. When he couldn't do it himself, he would watch them do it and tell them, you know, you got to go around again, put more water in there, you know, that kind of thing. He was very cautious about that sort of stuff.
Was there any moment, any particular Mass that stands out that was moving for you or you heard about?
Yeah, so when I was assigned to St. Mary in Helena, it was interesting because they had redesigned the sanctuary and both the ambo and the altar so that a priest in a wheelchair could use it. And they just thought, well, someday there'll be a priest in a wheelchair. Well, Stu was there, and I said, hey, I'm at St. Mary, and you haven't scheduled any Masses. You come over and you can do Mass in this church. It's designed for you. So he helped me a lot for a couple of years. I mean, I would put him on the schedule, and Bill would bring him over, and it was just great. But the first time he came over to St. Mary, it was the first time I saw him celebrate Mass from his wheelchair. And I remember he was like, he had to elevate the paten and the chalice for that. And he couldn't raise his arms. So the way he got the blood of Christ and the chalice lifted is he'd slide his fingers. He couldn't bend his fingers, but he'd slide them between the stems so he could, you know, steady the chalice. And then he would lean his torso over to the left, and he would get really low. And as he did, his hand would raise Christ in the chalice, you know, the blood of Christ in the chalice. And I was behind him that the first time I saw him do it, and I thought, my goodness, I mean, here is, you lower yourself to raise Christ. Literally, we're watching this. And it was profound. I mean, it struck me really profoundly. I think, you know, my Mass got taken up to another level when I saw Stu do that.
Right. And I was sharing with you, I talked to a lady that was away from the church 40 years and watched, she said, particularly at the consecration, the elevation, that just moved her to come back to Mass. And that's been such a joy this couple days, just hearing from the community, people that knew him, and really disparate groups, not just Catholics.
Really disparate,
And someone was sharing with me too, a lot of women as students from Carroll would come to him for counsel and advice, and that he helped them in their discernment. I thought that struck me because he could appeal to so many, you know, the youth, young adults, and older people, marriage problems. And
it didn't matter who you are, how old you were, how young you were, what your background was. If you wanted to see Stu, he would come on in, let's have a talk.
Yeah.
You know, he'd see anybody.
Right.
Anybody.
That's what the nursing facility people told me, that the facility that most of them weren't Catholic, but he had time for them. And
Yeah. The fun thing now is, like at Carroll College, is telling the students about Stu and finding them taking to his story and then asking for his help, his intercession, and so it's like that. It just keeps moving forward. It's just really beautiful and amazing.
Right. He told us one story about the family. Is any other stories about his intercession? Or I know you feel strongly that he wants to help us, or that God's plan is for us to.
The thing I can say is definitely, I will say I believe there are miracles happening through Stu's intercession. Sometimes those miracles have this kind of, and I don't, without going into long detail, this kind of cattywampus way that they come out. And it's like Stu's mark signature of like, you got my intercession, but because sometimes the miracles are always still pushing you forward to God. It's not like you get what you want and then you're done. Yeah. It's like you get a grace, but then you have to keep.
You have to give.
You have to keep giving, and the miracle just calls you to that. So I know there's one young lady that was kind of really despair because her boyfriend was discerning priesthood, and they weren't going to be dating anymore, and it just really bothered her. And I took her and a few of her friends out to the cemetery, and I said, why don't you ask this guy to help you? I told her Stu's story, and so she started praying for Stu's intercession, and I said, it'll help. And it was really amazing because after she started doing that, she just had this, she goes, I just have this peace about it, like it's going to be okay and everything. And then I said, it's not over with yet. And she said, what do you mean? I said, just be patient. Well, a few months later, the guy comes back and says, I've discerned not to be a priest. I want to date you. And so those two are dating. So I said, here's God's grace right here. Now you guys are going to have to work at dating because Stu's going to keep pushing you. Right. And they're both going to be great young people in the church and do a lot for God. It's just great to see.
Well, Father, thank you so much.
All right. Good to be with you. Yeah.
Amy, thank you so much for talking with us. And you're the younger sister of Father Stu, about 7-8 years. And,
yes.
And I was hoping you could just tell us a little about growing up together and your relationship with him.
Yeah, absolutely. He was my big brother, so, I kind of idolized him. I wanted to be around him all the time. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to do the stuff he did. We had a lot of fun growing up. I wanted to hang out with him and his friends as much as possible, all his high school football buddies, so it was great.
And he was a fun guy. I've heard some stories.
Yeah, he was a fun guy. Absolutely.
He wrestled, and was he a big hunter or any fisherman?
No, he didn't do any of that. He was more of a sports guy. Okay. He would gain weight for football, cut weight for wrestling, always successful at it, and then the boxing came along, and of course he excelled at that. Yeah, and I've got a story about the boxing. So I think I was about 12, I believe, when he was really getting into the boxing. And he'd come home after boxing practice, and I'd say, can you teach me? How did it go? He'd like, yeah, grab a pillow. So I'd grab a pillow, and he'd have me hold it out in front of me as hard as I could. And he'd punch through the pillow, and the pillow would always hit me in the face. Yeah. So we did that for about 2 weeks. Every time he'd come home, I'm like, can you teach me something? Can you teach me something? So finally, after about 2 weeks of that, I knew it was coming, right? So I'm holding the pillow out. And he goes to punch the pillow, but before I could, I threw the pillow to the side, ducked under, and got him right in the gut. And he goes, oh, it's about time. So from that point on, he started teaching me things. So that's kind of how it went. Yeah.
And he gave you a love for athletics?
He did. He did one of the first difficult workouts I ever did. He took me to Vigilante Stadium, which is kind of uptown, and it was always locked, but we got in because there was a way you could kind of get through the fence. Right. So he took me in, and he had me doing wind sprints and running the bleachers, and I mean he had me working so hard I had to go, and I got a little bit sick, and I came back, and he goes, okay, you ready to keep going? I'm like, yeah, let's go. And he did that up until he died. When I'd come up to visit, I'd come up about, I don't know, maybe 3-4 times a year. We'd go work out. We'd go to the gym, and he'd be the trainer. Right. Yeah, and there was another gal usually that would come with us, or just me, and he'd be whizzing around in his power chair telling me exactly what to do. You got 5 more. And instead of saying, no way, you just like, okay, I got it. So yeah, he was a great trainer up till the end.
And he went to Carroll College? The local,
Yeah, he did.
And he studied English, I heard.
Yeah, English literature.
Was that a
English literature
surprise
and
to
writing.
you, or-
No, he was always very articulate. And if Stu was interested in something, he mastered it.
Mhm.
So if it was something that he had a deep interest in, he would learn everything about it. And very, very intelligent. But if he didn't like it, he just really couldn't really give it much time.
Right. And then he had a boxing career, started in college, went after for a number of years. How long was that? He quit about, do you know roughly how old he was?
When he stopped boxing, I believe somewhere between 84 and 86. So if I was 16, about 22-ish, I want to say.
Oh, okay. And he also was like a bouncer, right? At a bar.
Yeah, he was at the Ice House in Pasadena. It was a comedy club and bar.
Oh,
Then there was also another bar, kind of kitty corner from it, out there. And so he would bounce at that bar as well. And I remember when I was out visiting one time, because my dad was out there at the time working as well. So I went out to visit and went to the Ice House, and he had to work. So, I watched the comedy and everything. I can't remember if it was there at the bar, but there had been a fight he had to break up. And he had to bounce somebody. They got physical with someone, and so he had to bounce him. And then he came back in. I'm like, "You okay?" He was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Give me a minute." So he went back out to make sure that the guy was okay, and kind of picked him up and made sure he had a ride home. I think he may have even called him a taxi to take him home. That's kind of the guy he was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the acting bug that hit him, he went out and pursued it like 7 years or something like that.
Yeah, as somewhere in there, maybe not quite that long. Maybe after the first few, he kind of realized it wasn't really for him. Yeah, it wasn't really what the industry, I think, was really not what he wanted to do, and he wasn't willing to kind of sacrifice who he was for that.
Yeah. And he loved movies, though. You all as a family would joke about movies.
We would watch Rocky every chance we got. He and I would sit here and watch it, and then as we grew older, sometimes we would just call each other up and quote parts of the movie, like "Stop the fight."
Yeah. And then he quit the acting jobs and then worked for a museum, and that's when the wreck happened, right?
Yeah, he was on his way home from work one day on his motorcycle and was hit by one car and run over by another and critically injured.
Did he break a lot of bones in that?
I don't recall which bones he broke, but yeah, and his head, his helmet, I think, basically saved his life. It had it was cracked almost all the way through.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then at some point, that was kind of a beginning of a spiritual kind of experience.
It was. Yeah, he had said, and we didn't talk about that part a lot, but maybe this is what I've heard from other people, is he had an experience right after the wreck while he was in the hospital, and that's kind of when he knew he was going to be a priest.
And some of his girlfriends helped him deepen his faith?
Yeah, one of his longtime girlfriends, one day they were together and she was vacuuming, and he said, well, what's going on with you? And she said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? And he said, you're glowing. He said, you're beautiful. There's like a light around you. And she said, well, I've just been to confession and I hadn't been in a long time. And if we're going to continue our relationship, you're going to need to join the church. So he did, and that kind of started that journey as well.
And someone was telling me too that he was real active in the parish there.
Yes, he was. He loved it.
And that grew. I think he taught some high school out in California.
He did. He taught up at Alameda, and he was a wrestling coach there too. Yeah, and the kids loved him. I went to probably 4 or 5 of the wrestling matches, and they just loved Stu. They just loved, and he loved the kids too. Right. It was great.
And during this time, he's thinking about the priesthood, because I think at his baptism he felt the idea came to him.
It did, and I think that one of the priests that baptized him said, "Oh, don't worry about it. When adult males get baptized, they all think they're going to need to be priests. It'll go away." And I remember Stu kind of fighting it, like, "No, not me, a priest? What?" Yeah. And he tried as long as he could, but it just kept coming back to him.
Wow. And then he tried it, and You joined the Franciscans in New York for a while. But
Yeah.
then-
Yeah. I don't think that was his calling. I don't think that worked out for everybody. So yeah. So he moved on from there.
Yeah. So he joined the Diocese of Helena, and then he's studying in Oregon, and that's when the diagnosis came. I think it was
Yeah.
like his last year.
I think so, pretty close to the last year, the inclusion body myositis. Yeah.
So,
He described it as one time trying to stand, and it felt as if there was a ball on a table that was slightly tilted, and the ball was rolling off. He said that's what his energy felt like. It was just slowly draining away.
and obviously he was upset.
Yeah, he had a hard time with it at first. He didn't understand why, and I think he really had a hard time because he'd always been so physically active. You know, a boxer, a wrestler, a football player, always physically fit. So it was real difficult for him. But once he accepted it and grasped it and knew that there really isn't a cure for this, it's not going to go away. It's almost as if he embraced it and he just was at peace with it.
And the bishop, wanted to ordain him and really felt like it was God's will. And you all have a beautiful cathedral here in Helena.
Yeah.
Tell us about that day of his ordination.
It was amazing. The cathedral is such a gorgeous building. When the sun comes in through those stained glass windows, it's just breathtaking. And then there's my brother standing up there with his sticks, as we called them. And he says, I stand before you a broken man. And tears were coming out of his eyes. It was so emotional and so overpowering. And there was such grace and peace and love just pouring out of him. I think everybody felt it.
Wasn't a dry eye in the house.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
It was packed too.
It was packed, yeah. And Father Bart was also getting ordained at the same time. And so I got to meet him, and he's a wonderful human. Him and Stu were the best of friends.
And he had some active ministry for a while. Eventually,
Yeah.
in
In Anaconda. He was over there. And my dad ended up going over there and living with him for a while to assist him as his disease progressed.
And what did God? I know you all in your family, you give a great witness of caring for others, and did that really make an impression on you to see your father? I mean, he retired from work and he was helping him in the parish.
Yeah. Yeah, it was amazing. He retired and almost immediately went and was taking care of Stu and helping him all the way to the end, and then my mother was ill and he took care of her as well. And my father's a great man, but he's even better when he's helping others. And he has really found a love of the church and because of Stu, was also baptized, and my mother was baptized before she passed away.
And what did you think when he was in the nursing facility? Lines of people coming to see him. Were you out there telling stories about high school? Or?
Nope. I saved all those. I figured if he wanted to tell those stories, he could tell those stories. But a lot of those people already knew the stories because they went to high school with him.
Right.
And I know we've talked before a little bit about how people maybe had been away from the church or never had really much experience with the church, and they'd come to visit Stu because they remembered him from high school, and he'd talk with them, and a lot of those people ended up going back to the church or becoming Catholic for the first time. And
that impressed you, seeing him offer Mass. What touched you about that?
It was pretty emotional because I'd come up about 4 times a year, and every time I'd go to Mass up at the nursing home, and every time he gave Mass, and as he progressed through the disease, it became more and more special. You could really feel his love for God and love for what he was doing. It was amazing, actually. I cried every time, until the one time he sang Linda Ronstadt, "Love is a Rose," and then I was dying laughing. It was hysterical. And the Mass was in the nursing home. It was downstairs in the dementia ward. It's in the Alzheimer's unit. And so everybody would file in. There was always, standing room only. And, somebody, the residents could come and go as they pleased. And there was this one woman, I believe her name was Ethel, and she was a sweetheart, but she was pretty far into her Alzheimer's disease. And she'd wheel herself in and go over to the corner. And so here's Stu's here, and she's over in the corner, and she's yelling and, starting to take off her clothes. And, she got down to a certain point, and Stu never missed a beat. He never got upset, nothing. He would just say to one of the assistants, "Hey, Joe, could you come over here for a minute? I think Ethel's having a rough day." And he'd come and get her and take her out. But it was never, hey, could you keep these people out of here? No, it was all just part of it. Stu loved everybody. Didn't matter your station in life. Stu was kind. And it's interesting because everybody thought he was this tough, mean guy. Even when he was being tough and fighting, he was still so kind and generous. And you know how people say, do the right thing when nobody's looking? Back when he was all tough and bad, he would do the right thing because nobody was looking. Like, he'd be like, okay, can I do this without anybody seeing me? He was always, always kind. I think I learned that from him as well. There was one time when I was back and I took him up in his van, the Holy Roller, and took him up to the cathedral, and there's a parking lot, and I think you might have seen it. It's kind of far away from the steps that go up. And so I was going to pull up in front and help him out because he was using his sticks at the time. And he wanted me to park there, and I, kind of helped him get out. And he goes, "Wait here." I'm like, "Well, you don't, no, I'm good. So he, it's probably, it was a ways away to get to those stairs. And he's starting to walk towards the stairs, and he sees an elderly woman with bags in each of her hands starting to walk up there as well. So I see him quicken his pace. And I'm thinking, oh no, he's going to fall. This is not good. But I knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to get up those stairs faster than she got up there so he could hold the door for her. That just kind of explains Stu. He just was always kind. Always. Yeah. Absolutely. And he was tough and kind and smart and vulnerable and stubborn and giving. I think that even when he had nothing to give, and even when people would give him things. I remember when he was in the seminary, like starting out, I think one of his friends gave him a computer, gave him a laptop, and said, yeah, because Stu really needed a laptop for his studies. And the next time the person came to visit, where's the laptop? Oh, I gave it away. Well, why? Oh, because somebody needed it more than I did. He was always doing that.
And he was close. I heard there was a couple of friends from seminary that became priests and would come visit him.
Yes. Father Ed Benehoff. He's down now in the Beverly Hills parish. Yeah, he's down there. And I think that's kind of how Mark found out about Father Stu, because it was, I think it was late one night, maybe they were drinking some wine, and Father Stu had just passed away, and so Father Ed was telling Mark kind of about Stu, and he got so interested in the story.
Wow.
Yeah.
He was, and then he would come, and I was told that they would have a good time together. He would come alive seeing his old friends.
Absolutely, yeah. And his friend Rob wasn't in the seminary, but a very, very, very good man, doing lots of things to help people. And they would come up, and they'd have a lot of fun when they came up.
Were there some people that struck you that would come to see Father Stu, or maybe some stories you recall, or something that impressed you about that time? Because I heard there was like a line.
There was always lines of people, and after the mass, people would want to come up, and my understanding is, when I because I wasn't there all the time, but lots of people would come for confession. They'd just be lined up, and people would want to do things for him. I had mentioned he would let people rub his feet because he couldn't, at that time reach his feet, and they would swell and get pretty sore, so you could rub them and put lotion on, and it was kind of a way for him to let other people give back to him, which I think was difficult for him because of how strong he had been, but he realized how much it meant to other people to be able to do something like that for him.
Yeah, I've spoken to some locals, and some of the local women had friends with him too, and it sounded like they helped him with whatever. And
they did. There were some people that were so close to him. I mean, best friends. He helped them with some major issues that had come up in their lives, and he talked them through it and helped them. And then there was a group of girls that he would work out at the gym, and he would do that to me as well. You know, he was quite the drill sergeant there. When you'd go to the gym, he'd be making you do all your reps and you know, buzzing around in his chair telling you what to do.
And the day he did pass away, were you able to be up here?
I wasn't. Him and I had a discussion when I was up in April for my father's baptism, and that was the last time we spoke. And we had a discussion, and he didn't want me to come back for that, so I didn't. I came as soon as I got the word. I came back. Yeah, we had a nice long farewell. It was beautiful.
And it's interesting to me that, like, you're not Catholic, and you said he never pressured you to become Catholic.
He didn't. After masses, sometimes I would have questions, and he'd explain things to me in the Stu way, which is basically how I would best understand it. You know, questions I'd have about a certain topic or you know, a certain part of the Bible that he was quoting, and he'd always help me understand it, but he never once pressured me.
Right.
Yeah. He was still just my big brother.
Yeah. And the funeral itself, well, he's buried at Resurrection Cemetery, is that right?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
And there was many people came for that.
Oh yeah, the funeral was huge. There was, tons of people there. People from Anaconda that he had touched, you know, people from California, people from the seminary, you know, people here in Helena, just far and wide, old friends, new friends.
And what was one of the lasting impression, maybe, is there something you think about his life now that strikes you? That I know sometimes I think of my relatives and things like they endured and went through, and it inspires me today.
Yeah.
Is there something like that?
Every day I wake up and I can get out of bed on my own.
Yeah.
And I can hear, I can see, I think of him every morning, because he couldn't do a lot of those things. He couldn't get up or get out on his own, and just the fact that I'm able to do just that, wake up every morning, I'm so grateful. And I think of him, and that's kind of how I start my day. I think of what good can I do today? You know, so I try and do that as much as possible every day, something a little better than the day before. Right. He had that effect on everybody. Yeah, he really did. And so every day when I wake up, I want to be a better person because of Stu.
Well, thank you so much.
Oh, you bet. You bet.